you go. So Luke chapter 7, beginning in verse 19. I'll read down through verse 23. Luke chapter 7, verses 19 through 23. And John, calling unto him 2 of his disciples, sent them to Jesus, saying, Art thou he that should come, or look we for another? When the men were come unto him, they said, John Baptist hath sent us unto thee, saying, Art thou he that should come, or look we for another? And in that same hour he cured many of their infirmities and plagues and of evil spirits, and unto many that were blind he gave sight. Then Jesus answering said unto them, Go your way and tell John what things ye have seen and heard, how that the blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, to the poor the gospel is preached, and blessed is he whosoever shall not be offended in me. We're still looking at finding the will of God and doing the will of God, and in order for us to be able to do that successfully, we have to overcome some of those obstacles to our faith. Fear being one of the greatest obstacles. And we looked at the fear of getting involved. It's a risk to get involved. We might be rejected by people. It may cause controversy, and we don't want to get involved. Maybe I'm not sure I know how to do that, or something along those lines, and so we fear getting involved. Then the next fear that we want to consider now is the fear of being deceived. The fear of being deceived. No one likes to be taken advantage of or deceived. So whether it's losing money in a Ponzi scheme or Social Security type thing, we are getting emotionally attached and then being betrayed. There are people who will purposely go out and find an older woman or an older man and get themselves attached to them, or to be then turned and betray, to extract money from that person and to betray them, or even if it's not a circumstance like that, you'll have somebody who will get involved with and even marry somebody only to just continue philandering after that. It's to, you have a wife, why do you go out and cheat on her all the time, and you've betrayed that trust. And so when a person is then injured, it's very difficult to trust again. I got hurt, and no one likes to be scammed, and no one likes to admit to having been deceived, but when it happens, we then have what we call trust issues after that. And so we need to realize that we are not only targeted financially and emotionally, but we're also targeted spiritually. And Satan loves deceiving people, including God's people. Now, he can deceive the lost, and it's a whole lot easier to deceive the lost because they're lost. But even God's people can be deceived by the devil because he's very clever at disguising his lies. And we can be deceived. Eve was deceived. And so we can be deceived concerning spiritual truth, and we need to be able to understand that we are the target of the deception, for the deception. So as we seek and do God's will, we risk being misled. Not by God. God will never mislead us, but by these clever disguises of the devil. And so, we've all been hurt by someone who, so when some opportunity presents itself, we may be hesitant to act upon that. Brother Ken and I were talking about some of our fun experiences as pastors. It's really easy when you are hurt to then, forget it. I don't want anything more to do with that. I don't want to risk getting hurt again. And so we've got people who are attending the church here who used to attend other churches, and they got hurt at those other churches. And so you bring those scars with you coming forward, and You don't want to be hurt like that again. You don't want to be deceived by that. I heard those same words spoken at that other church, and then look what happened. So it's very easy to bear those scars going forward, and we become averse to taking any risk, and because of that fear of being deceived. And the devil will present to us because we tend to be more risk averse, he'll present to us a path as we're seeking to do God's will. He will show us something that looks so much easier. Oh wow, that looks a whole lot easier to do. It isn't always the go off into the depths of depravity. It's just away from God. This is what God wants us to do, but I know there's risk involved there. So the devil's going to present something that's going to look really good. It's going to look like God's will. Remember, it's no marvel that he will disguise himself as an angel of light and a messenger of righteousness, correct? And so this is going to look really good. It's going to look like the will of God, but it's the less risky endeavor. And so we end up becoming deceived, trying to avoid being deceived. The devil is leading us down what they call the primrose path. Now, John the Baptist felt that he had been mistaken concerning the true identity of the Messiah. He's in prison at this point in time. He's like, are you him? Or are we looking for somebody else? It wasn't a deception as in someone purposely lied to him in order to harm him, but he felt he had been misled. One of those, how could I have gotten this wrong kind of situations. He had deceived himself, or it was like, this doesn't make sense. I poured everything into this. I'm sitting in a jail. Are you even the guy we're looking for? Isn't that awful? He's beginning to question his own faith. What could cause this great and godly man to feel that he was wrong about the Lord's identity? Well, let's take a look at this. If we're going to overcome this fear, the risks are real. I describe it like this. If we are going to love the way God tells us we are to love, it is all in. You cannot withhold anything. You must put everything on the line. And when you do that, you are risking being taken advantage of, being abused, being hurt, losing it all. To love someone absolutely, you risk being hurt and deceived. And you will be. The question then becomes, how do you respond? Well, I just won't love that quite as much anymore. I'll withhold a little bit. I'll keep an arm's length from them. That's not the way we're supposed to do it. It's all in. You get hurt, you go back in. You get hurt, you go back in. You get hurt, you go back in. That's the risk. Isn't that the risk that Jesus took? All in. So the risk of being deceived is real. It will always be there. But we will talk ourselves out of doing the will of God out of fear of being deceived. And so we need to overcome that so that we can experience God's will and the life that God has for us even greater than what we presently are. And so let's look at John the Baptist and John chapter 3. Let's go over to John chapter 3. Oops, all right. John chapter 3, verses 26 through 30. And they came unto John and said unto him, Rabbi, he that was with thee beyond Jordan, to whom thou bearest witness, behold, the same baptizeth, and all men come to him. John answered and said, A man can receive nothing except to be given him from heaven. Ye yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but that I am sent before him. He that hath the bride is the bridegroom, but the friend of the bridegroom, which standeth and heareth him, rejoiceth greatly because of the bridegroom's voice. This my joy therefore is fulfilled. He must increase, but I must decrease. Doubts can be caused by a reversal or a setback in life. We begin to have these doubts. See, John had known from his childhood that he would be a preacher. He would be the voice in the wilderness. We don't know pretty much anything else about John's childhood. And perhaps by this time, his parents are passed away because they were kind of old when he was born. And so, not knowing anything else about it, he just knew that he was going to be the one to announce the coming of the Messiah. So when his ministry begins, it's explosive. It just grows. People are going, this is unusual, people are going from the city out into the wilderness to hear him preach. Now, you ask anybody about church planting, and they'll tell you to plant churches near where people go shopping. Not where they work, and not necessarily where they live, because it's hard to find church property in residential areas. So you put churches where people shop, because they're going to go there. They don't go from the city to the country, they go from the country into the city. So here's people going from the city, even the elites are going out. Country bumpkins might go out to the country, but you don't get city folk going out to the country. And yet they were. The word of John the Baptist's preaching is getting into royalty. Herod knows John. Isn't that crazy? And you know what? John's ministry only lasted 6 months. So here's this guy who is the voice announcing the Messiah. Now he's sitting in jail probably thinking, I've only been at this for 6 months. Surely, now that the Messiah has come, okay, I'm in jail right now, I get it, whatever. He's going to let me out. He's going to somehow or another get me out of here. He can go one direction. I can go the other direction. And man, oh man, we'll meet on the other side of the world. And wow. But he never got out of jail, did he? Well, not with his head anyway. 6 months. When Jesus comes to town, Jesus does not come to the jail. Jesus does not let him out. So he's sitting there thinking, are you even the guy? Are we looking for someone else? How in the world could this happen? There was a reversal of fortunes, shall we say. He's out there preaching to the masses, and now he's in jail. And he's about to be executed. He made somebody mad. See, preaching the word is not popular. Eventually, someone's going to get upset. And it's this kind of reversal of fortune that can cause a person's confidence to waver, even so far as to begin to question your own faith. When we sit down at a reversal of fortune, even coming down off of monumental highs, we have to be very careful because the lows can be extreme. This whole emotion-driven, touchy-feely, hand-waving kind of church that goes a lot in today and has been for a while, it's so dangerous because it's like a drug addiction where you take that first hit and you're chasing that next high, and it's got to be higher and higher and higher and higher. And the problem is the crashes get lower and lower and lower and lower. and you're on this emotional roller coaster that if you aren't having visions and dreams and tongues and signs and wonders and magnificent feelings, and if you don't have all of that in increase, church becomes boring. Your faith begins to wane. It's not as exciting as it used to be. Must not be working anymore. God must not be real anymore. And you get these reverses of fortune. The next thing you know, you're sitting at the bottom and you can't get out. Because nothing of what you've had has been real. But here's John with real faith. And he has a reversal in fortune, preaching to the masses, and now he's in jail to be executed. How does that happen? And he begins to wonder. He begins to doubt. And we would all do the same thing. Maybe he's asked, what went wrong? What happened? What did I do wrong? Did I do something wrong? I asked that question. I asked that question when we were in Florida. Lord, did I do something wrong? Why would you send me to that church when they were like that? Did I do something wrong? Are they right and I'm wrong? All I know is I went there and I preached what I thought you wanted me to preach. And the final answer is you did. And they said no. I didn't go there and tell you what the final result would be. You never would have gone. So, no, wait a minute, Lord. That's not true. If you had told me they were going to do this, I would have been a little bit prepared for it. I got waylaid. So here's John in the same kind of situation. And getting outside the church and looking at life, maybe you got pregnant and you weren't expecting it. That happens. Maybe instead of getting the promotion at work, you got fired. Maybe instead of the girl saying yes, she said no. There's all kinds of things that can happen. You get this great job and you love it, and then you get hurt. You're making good money and now you're crippled. And you begin to wonder, did I do something wrong? Why would God do this to me? Plans can change the moment you implement them. And these setbacks or reversals create doubts about things we never doubted before. Have I been deceived? How could I be so wrong? So the next time something comes up, an opportunity comes up, we're less likely to take that chance anymore. I tried that once before and it didn't work. That didn't go very well, so I think I'll pass. We're seeking and doing God's will, but I'm going to pass on that one. And we never will. John asks of Jesus in Matthew 11:3, art thou he that should come, or do we look for another? That's how bad it got for John. He was confident when he was preaching, the Messiah is coming. And then behold, there he is. Did not John the Baptist baptize Jesus? Or am I getting my stories mixed up? There he is, right there. Are you even him? Or do we look for another? The Spirit of God descends upon this man like a dove, and he comes out of the water, and now all of a sudden, are you even him? These setbacks can cause us to doubt our own salvation. We're in bad straits when that happens. And once we've been hurt once, we fear being hurt again. We fear being deceived by other people who aren't trying to deceive us, people who are trying to love us and guide us and encourage us, but yet we have that scar. Yeah, I've heard that one before. We're afraid of being deceived again. Go and look at John chapter 6, verse 66. What, are you guys going to go away too? Jesus had to ask that. Oh, it's great when it's all lovey, touchy-feely, Jesus loves you preaching, but when you start getting into the kind of meat of the word there, I don't think I like that. What do you mean? Persecution, suffering, and what? No, I think I'll pass, thank you. Doubts can arise when we get hurt doing right. Let's look at Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14. In Matthew chapter 14, verses 3 and 4, it says, "For Herod had laid hold on John and bound him and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. For John said unto him, It is not lawful for thee to have her." So here's John preaching against sin, which is, it is probably the most popular thing a man can preach on, right? When John preached from the pulpit in the wilderness, he was met by those who wanted to experience a changed life. And a lot of people were baptized. But when John's message began reaching into the places of royalty, it began creating an entirely different reaction, one of hatred. Eventually, when you preach against sin, you're going to ruffle feathers. Not generic sin. It's easy to preach against sin. Try preaching against gossip when you know there are people in the church that are gossiping. Preach against idleness when you know there are people who are deadbeat sucking the welfare system. Preach against slothfulness when you know there are people lazy in their work and they're just the man pleasers. The boss comes along and they look like they're busy, and as soon as the boss is away, they go back to Facebook. Try preaching on greed and lust, pornography and alcohol. Do it. I dare you. You'll find your warm reception not so warm anymore. Here's John preaching that, Herod, what you are doing is adultery. It's a sin against God. Not very popular to tell the king he's sinning against God. But he did it. Now he's about to pay the price. It is not uncommon for people to get angry when you preach against sin. And eventually, if you preach against sin long enough, or preach on sanctified living. Preach on sanctified living. And when I say preach on it, it doesn't mean you're the pastor of a church. It just means confront somebody about their sin. And see how warmly it's received. It's not about beating them over the head with the Bible. It's not about holier than thou, being judgmental, because they're going to throw back the judge. Not that ye be not judged. They're going to throw it all back in your face. What kind of a Christian are you? I say these because I've heard them, so please excuse me. I've heard it all. If there's anything new to be said to me, I can't wait to hear it. And I don't mean that to boast. It's just good night. You get so much. It's like, okay, yep. And then now cue the judge not to be done. Judge not to be done. Thank you. Was waiting for that one. It's not about being judgmental. It's not about being holier than thou. It's not about me being better than anyone. Believe me, I'm not. But when you try to show somebody what they're doing is a sin against God, they treat you as the enemy. I'm trying to help them, and they're treating me as the enemy. I can't make them do anything, but just pointing it out makes me an enemy. I'm trying to do right. I've stood out on the sidewalk and just read from the Bible. And you would not, you'd have to clean out. I cannot repeat the words that were flung at me. Just reading the Bible. How dare you do that? I'm calling the police. Okay. I've had that happen before. We got called, had the police call out there in Monterey, and the police come. Hey, you're standing where you're allowed to stand. You're doing what you're allowed to do, but they called. I have to show up. I gotta, see what's going on here. And I'm like, okay. Yeah, the folks at the barbecue joint over there don't like to hear you preaching over here. I'm like, yeah, okay. But you don't have to stop. Would you believe 2 weeks later that business was closed? Aside from ministry and preaching the word, trying to demonstrate the love of Christ, and that's all it is. It's just trying to demonstrate the love of Christ. As such were some of you, right? So, look, I see the path you're heading down. I know where you're going. I know where this goes. Please stop. You're just trying to save that friend, that loved one from going off into a bad place. But now you're judgmental. Now you're the enemy. So you're trying to do right, and now you are being targeted. Hate speech, bigotry, racism. You tell the truth, and you're still punished. That ever happened to anyone? You told the truth. I thought you're supposed to tell the truth. Well, evidently not. Because the liars sure seem to be running things, don't they? You can defend good and right and still be harmed. It doesn't matter that you're doing good. It doesn't matter that you're doing right. Here you are being harmed. Remember, Jesus told the truth, and he did right, and he did right, but he was betrayed, and he was abused, and he was harmed. John was doing right, but instead of being rewarded, he found himself being arrested and placed on death row. His preaching made him a marked man, and his reward for obeying God was a prison cell and an appointment with death. We will avoid taking those chances, those risks, because I don't want to go to prison and I don't want to have my head cut off. I'm rather attached to it. We don't take those, we are afraid of being deceived. Because if I go out there and I start preaching the word, and I mean, wow, how can people respond so bad? I thought this was good. I thought by trying to love people and minister to them, I thought that was a good thing. Trying to help somebody get off of the drugs, trying to help the homeless person, trying to do something. I thought that was compassionate and good and righteous, and here I am. I'm now a marked man. See, it's okay if you give money to the homeless. Just don't say the name of Jesus. Did you know Jesus' disciples went out there and they were facing the persecutors, the prosecutors, and they said, "Stop preaching in the name of Jesus." And they said, "I'm sorry, but we can't do that." And they were martyred. They did what God wanted them to do, and they were martyred for their faith. Well, you just lost me there, preacher. I'm willing to go and visit the shut-in who asked me to come, but I'm not going to knock on any doors. If somebody asks for help, I'm willing to do it, but I don't think I can risk offering help. And that happens. We say we want to do the will of God, but then when we're faced with the opportunity that maybe it won't be very well received, I don't know, I might lose a friend. My kids might turn away from me, and I'll lose my kids. That's the real hard one. I'll be disowned by my family. And not making light of it, it's very real. But it will also hinder us from doing the will of God. It's a risk we have to be willing to take. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 10, "Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And the very next verse he says, "Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake." So yeah, I don't think so, Jesus, I quit. But those doubts will come in. The fear of being deceived. Is this even worth it? I mean, I've read through here, and people are just waxing worse and worse. Evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse, and hearts are growing harder and harder. And maybe it's just not worth it to go out and do that. I don't want to. If people want to get saved, they can ask, and I'll share it with them. But how many of you have encountered the "Sirs, what must I do to be saved"? Anyone have that come to you? It happened. Oh, how many of you had somebody come up to you and said, "What must I do to be saved"? It happens so infrequently. It's not like you're in Walmart grabbing a Lego waffle cereal and somebody says, sir, can you tell me how to get saved? I mean, that would be cool, wouldn't it? But I've never had that happen. So we can't expect that it will happen very often. We actually have to go out there, strike up a conversation, risking them slamming the door in our face or rejecting us, saying, you know what, I don't want your stuff in my house. Please don't come back. But we've been friends for 35 years. Yeah, but I don't want that in my house anymore. Okay? Doubts will come. Doubts are also caused by disappointments. Let's look at Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4, verse 12. Matthew chapter 4, verse 12 says, now when Jesus had heard that John was cast into prison, he departed into Galilee. So as John is sitting in that prison cell, he hears that Jesus is nearby, believing Jesus to be the Messiah. John thought, well, surely I'm going to be released. Jesus is going to come visit me somehow or another. But look what Jesus does. He goes to Galilee instead. Never goes to see John in prison. So these doubts are caused by disappointments. And it's easy to be disappointed in other people, and you are going to disappoint people. They're going to disappoint you. I know it sounds cynical, but I don't put out any expectations on anybody. I don't. If I'm in a position where there are rules established, and I can then look at the rule and say, this is the minimum standard that is acceptable, I will hold you to that standard. But as far as personal expectations, I set none. And I know that sounds horrible. Part of it is because I don't want to be disappointed. I look at it like, if I set something way up here, if I set the expectation way up here, and then they don't come through, I'm going to be disappointed in them or angry at them, or in some way or another, it's going to affect negatively. Even if they gave it all, but now it's a failure. So I set it down here. It's kind of like salvation. Set the bar really, really low, because you can't save yourself, can you? It goes back to that Matthew chapter 5 in the Beatitudes. It just comes with that humble heart. Well, if you could just, it starts there. Set the bar really low. We can all clear that one. So I set no expectation, so that whatever they do, it's a positive. Is there room for improvement? Is there a lesson to learn? It's set the bar low to give them something to succeed and to grow. It's that new person gets saved and they don't know anything. So that first time they do something, you're like, yeah, that's it exactly. It's your kids learning how to walk. The first time they take that one step, we're cheering. But if they're 14 years old and they still only take one step, we kind of got a problem, right? So let's get that first step. Oh, you're standing. Plop. And they take that first step, and you're like, yes! And then it's 2 steps, and then you're running and you can't catch up with them. Isn't that wonderful? But doubts are caused by disappointments. We set ourselves up to be disappointed because we put these expectations that person can't fulfill. Now, Jesus is a different story. He could fulfill all expectations, and he did. But John is now doubting and questioning, wait a minute. He went to Galilee? Why didn't he come here? Now he's disappointed in Jesus. Now that downhill slide into, are you even the guy we're looking for? Why do I even bother? Why do I bother trying to be holy when it's not worth my time? I vote by the Bible, and yet my vote gets canceled out by 10 people who don't even live here, who maybe don't even exist. I'm honest at work. Why? When the cheat gets the promotion. My boss is a big fat liar. Why do I stay? Why do I try? It doesn't matter. We set ourselves up for disappointment. And when we get disappointed, because we will be disappointed, now we don't want to take the risk of being disappointed again. And it becomes a miserable life that we end up living after that. And we can spiral into very dark places after that. John did absolutely nothing wrong. But he became disappointed. When we allow ourselves to get disappointed in God, and a lot of people do, because they think that that's that name it and claim it stuff. God just wants us to be healthy and rich and just name it and it's yours. And that's not how it works. Because our eyes are seeing temporal things, and that's not how it works. Does God want us to be happy? Yes, and He shows us how to be. If we want God's blessings, we can learn. We can know how to do it right here, to be blessable. But we get disappointed when we don't get what we want right when we want it. We're taught that that's how it works, and that's not how it works. And so we're disappointed when it doesn't work, and now we're going away from God. Well, yeah, I tried church once. Yeah, I tried praying once. Yeah, I tried that once. We'll try it again. Nah, it's not worth it. I'm sure we probably all know plenty of people who just find church and faith and God. I tried Jesus and it didn't work. Probably all know plenty of people like that. And their lives are probably kind of miserable, aren't they? They've got an answer for everything. Oh, I believe in God. Yeah, I'm all set. But their lives are really and truly miserable lives. If we are going to do the will of God, we cannot allow ourselves to be disappointed like that. We're afraid of being disappointed, so we don't. We've been disappointed, and we don't want to be disappointed again. And so we don't do the will of God because we know that there's only so much that we can do, and now the rest is on somebody else. And they may or may not be as faithful as you. Confidence in an unfaithful man is like a broken tooth and a foot out of joint. And we see that played out over and over. And yet, God says, you worry about you. You do what I want you to do and leave the rest to me. Do the will of God. You will be disappointed because people are people. God says, I will never disappoint you, and He won't. But if we're deceived, going back to being deceived, we think God disappointed us because things didn't work out the way we thought they would or expected they would or demanded that they should. Right? So fear of being deceived is very powerful. A fourth way of being deceived is when those doubts come that are caused by injustices. Let's look at Mark chapter 6. Anytime we see what we consider an injustice, and they can be very real injustices, in Mark chapter 6, verses 22 through 26, and when the daughter of the said Herodias came in and danced and pleased Herod and them that sat with him, the king said unto the damsel, Ask of me whatever thou wilt, and I will give it thee. And he sware unto her, Whatsoever thou shalt ask of me, I will give it thee unto the half of my kingdom. And she went forth and said unto her mother, What shall I ask? And she said, The head of John the Baptist. And she came in straightway and with haste unto the king and asked, saying, I will that thou give me by and by in a charger the head of John the Baptist. And the king was exceeding sorry, yet for his oath's sake and for their sakes which sat with him, he would not reject her. You know, it seems like maybe Herod might have had a little bit of a sense of fair play. I think he liked John, but he needed to save face. And that's all it was. Instead of saying, oh, come on, you ludicrous little girl, something real. I'm not going to execute John the Baptist. Good grief. But no, he didn't do that. So John was executed, just as she requested. By doing so, Herod was actually guilty of a grave injustice. Why was he in prison? Because somebody got offended at the truth and would not repent. Why was John executed? Because Herod was afraid of losing face in front of the people that were with him. It's a grave injustice. They had to lie in order to prosecute Jesus and then execute Jesus. And many, many others, the false witnesses. There are times in our lives when we will witness what is taking place and mumble to ourselves, this isn't right. And here's where we are afraid to get involved sometimes too, because when we are outnumbered to stand up and say, hey, what you're doing is wrong, now all of a sudden everyone turns on you. Do you want to be the target of a mob? Mobs don't think. Mobs are evil personalities in mass numbers. There's no reasoning with a mob. They're very, very dangerous. And you never want to be the target of a mob. But here, this injustice has taken place, and now we begin to wonder, how can a loving God allow this to happen? Look at how they're treating this person. This person has done nothing wrong, and look how they're treating this person. And it's Peter all over again. Hey, we saw you with him. Nope, wasn't me. No, I'm pretty sure no, it was not me. I want nothing to do with this guy. Oh, you mean the blankety blank guy? That blankety blank blank? Maybe it wasn't him. Sometimes it's like once we experience one injustice, everything turns. Now everyone is against us. If you've ever been on the receiving end, it's like once the sharks smell the blood in the water, right? We don't want to be, and that's why if you ever go diving with somebody, you've got a sharp knife with you. If a shark comes up, you can, or something else, stab that thing, draw blood, and the sharks will go after that, and you can get away. And if it's your swim buddy, then that's fine, right? No, just kidding. But we have to be careful. Once an injustice, we are afraid of the injustices because we don't want to be on the receiving end of the injustice. Or when we observe something taking place, we begin to wonder, why would God allow this to happen? And our faith begins to waver. Now I don't want to get involved. Now I'm afraid of doing the will of God because, hey, last time this was tried, look what happened. They burned down the church. They burned down my house. They threw my friend in jail. They beat and stoned and executed whatever it was. So-and-so got fired or whatever happened. You know, any number of different things. We especially fear death. We especially fear physical harm. We could sort of tolerate getting fired on a scale of like horrible down to mildly palatable. But we don't want to lose anything. And yet, anytime we go to do the will of God, we risk losing everything, even our own lives. And yet, if we lose our own lives in the service to the Lord, He even says, well, the crown of glory for the one who dies in my service. It's like, okay, that's a crown. I'm okay now. It's like I'm okay not having the Medal of Honor. I'm not a coward, but I don't want to be put to the test either. So that's one thing. I'm okay. Purple Heart, I'm perfectly content not having one. A friend of mine served 3 tours in Vietnam and has 0 Purple Hearts. 7 bronze stars, a couple of silver stars. Guy's pretty highly decorated, but no Purple Hearts. So his son has the boo-boo badge. He called it a boo-boo badge. There's no disrespect to anybody who gets a Purple Heart. His son is a retired now from the Army, and oh, you got your boo-boo badge. And it's like, he understands. The guy did Vietnam, 3 tours in Vietnam, nasty stuff. And he picks on his son for his boo-boo badge. But I'm like, hey, I served in the Navy so I wouldn't get shot at, okay? I'll be quite frank with you. I'm okay not being shot at. But I've had guns pointed at me out soul winning. I'm okay not being... I've been bitten by dogs. I've had the cops called on me. I've had guns pointed at me. I've been told in no uncertain terms, leave the neighborhood now. And so I did. But when there's an injustice, we don't want anything to do with that. Now I'm not so keen on doing the will of God. And those doubts begin to settle in. Well, maybe this isn't what God wants me to do. Maybe, and we stop. See if we can do one more here. Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14, verses 6 through 10. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before him and pleased Herod. Whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask. And she, being before instructed of her mother, said, give me here John Baptist's head in a charger. And the king was sorry. Nevertheless, for the oath's sake, and them that sat with him at meat, he commanded it to be given her. And he sent and beheaded John in the prison. Doubts are caused by God's silence. We had a message a while back on how to pray when God is silent. Because doubts can be caused when God is silent. You got to imagine that John was probably praying, Lord, what's going on here? John was somewhat of a hero and a legend even, and Herod surely took precautions when it came time to have him executed so that it would not be done too publicly. Let's just get this over with. This was not going to be a public execution, right? But at any time, God could have stepped in and stopped it. But he didn't. And when God is silent, you've done nothing wrong. There's an injustice that's taken place. You've done everything right. You've done what you're supposed to do. And now God didn't even come visit you in jail. Your prayers seem to not be being answered. But we know how John was spoken of Jesus after the fact. Now, it may not be much comfort to John. As well, yeah, you talk highly of me after I'm dead. How about helping me while I'm still alive? We have to just trust God. That's where we have to just trust God. During that time when God is silent, we have to trust God. And that is where doing the will of God becomes extremely difficult. We want the answers now. We want the solution to the problem now. We want to see the fruit now. We want the rewards now. And that's not always how it happens. And sometimes there's a price that gets paid we really don't want to have to pay. We keep expecting at the end God is going to make the walls of the jail fall down and we can walk right out. But remember, Paul didn't walk out. Paul and Silas stayed there and sang. But when God is silent is when our faith is tested the most. So that's what we got to stick with it. But we become afraid of being deceived. And so we won't go and do the will of God. We will question even God's integrity at these times. Let's close in prayer. We'll get ready for the morning service. Folks are starting to come in.